I would guess that most people who get married have one thing in common. There are a lot of differences between couples. There are rich couples and poor couples and loud couples and quiet couples and old couples and young couples and active couples and inactive couples. There are so many differences between couples, but one thing most couples have in common when they get married is they really want to have a good marriage. I haven't met many couples who on their wedding day are looking into their bride or their groom's eyes and thinking, I hope this thing ends terribly. I really am looking forward to a divorce. Most of the time they're thinking, this is amazing. I love this person. Could it get any better? And so a few years later, when things get very difficult, most couples who are having problems are wondering, how did something that was so good end up so bad? I think that's a good question, because it doesn't have to. It doesn't have to be a bad thing. It's God's idea, marriage. And when God designed marriage, he wasn't thinking, how can I make life really difficult for people? I mean, marriage is a demonstration of God's grace. And to help us enjoy marriage, God has even stooped down to show us how it's supposed to work. The word that we might use is blueprint. God has given us a blueprint. And when someone goes to construct a building, they don't just show up and start to work. Someone has made designs for that building, and we call those designs blueprints because they tell the workers what they're supposed to do. And in the Bible, God has given couples his blueprint for marriage. The problem, of course, and where marriages go wrong, is that couples don't actually follow God's blueprint for marriage. They've come up with their own plan instead. As R.C. Sproul writes, in every single marriage that ends in disaster, some stupid decisions were made with respect to God's regulations. If God's regulations were followed scrupulously, there would not only be no divorce, there would be no unhappy marriages. No unhappy marriages. So obviously, part of our job when we're having problems in marriage is to discover how and why we're not following God's blueprint, to understand God's blueprint and how it applies to your marriage, and recommit yourself to that blueprint, and then work on implementing that blueprint into your relationship. And in order to do that, I want to walk through a little more carefully God's basic blueprint for a beautiful marriage over the next few videos. And I want to try to show you how this applies specifically as you're dealing with problems in your relationship. And we'll talk first about the purposes of marriage. And I know we've talked a little bit about this already, but obviously couples must understand and commit themselves to the purposes of God for their marriage relationship if they're going to have a good, happy, holy marriage. And so I thought we might look again at the purposes of marriage and think more specifically about the implications for dealing with problems that come up in marriage. And we'll begin with just one: companionship. One of the purposes of marriage is companionship, friendship. As someone has said, when God brought the first man his spouse, he brought him not just a lover, but the friend his heart had been seeking. Obviously, marriage is for procreation, bear fruit and multiply, but not just for procreation and having babies. It's for friendship. Tim Keller has written, what Adam needed in the garden was not just a sexual partner, but a companion, bone of his bones and flesh of his flesh. Sometimes young people think of a prospective spouse as primarily a lover or a provider, and if he or she can be a friend on top of all that, well, isn't that nice? But it should be the other way around. Look first for friendship. In Proverbs 2:17, Solomon is talking about marriage and specifically about an adulteress and why what she's doing is so wrong. And he says one reason it's wrong is because she's forsaken her companion. And he's talking about her husband. And the word he uses for companion is a unique word that Hebrew dictionaries define as special friend, best friend. We know it's not the only purpose of marriage, but it is one purpose of marriage, friendship. And that's part of what is illustrated when God talks about the two becoming one flesh. There's a unity, a companionship that is supposed to be so deep. You can say it's not even like they're two people anymore. They're one. And so as couples, as we're looking at the state of our marriages, we have to evaluate the state of our friendship. Now, let me tell you one reason why that's hard for a lot of people to do. It's difficult for people to evaluate the state of their friendship in marriage because a lot of people have never really had a good friend, a good biblical friend at least. And so they don't even really know what it means to be a real friend. And so you're going to have to think through not just are we friends, but what does friendship involve? What does it mean to be a good friend? And I thought we could look at scriptures, a number of scriptures, and we're going to go through them real quickly, so jot them down and come back to them yourself. But these scriptures stress a number of qualities that are true of good friends. They describe what it means to be a friend, and I want you to think a little bit about whether or not you are that kind of friend to your spouse. So first of all, Romans 12:10. A good friend is committed to honoring the other. A friend cares. A friend is devoted to showing respect to the other person. Does your spouse know you can count on you? Does your spouse know you honor them? They matter to you. If so, how do they know that? What is it that you do that demonstrates your commitment to them? 1 Thessalonians 3:12 in chapter 4, verses 9 and 10, a good friend grows in their love for the other person. Is there more affection in your heart for your spouse than there was last year? Are you getting better at loving your spouse? Love is a skill. Are you growing in your ability to love your spouse? Romans 15, verse 7, and chapter 14, verse 1 and 13, accepting another person without being overly critical. A good friend is able to share problems and listen to the other person share problems without being condemnatory. Are you open with your spouse? Are you afraid to let the other person know what's going on in your heart because of how they'll react? Is your spouse afraid to let you know what's going on in your heart because of how you'll react? Are you a good friend? Philippians chapter 2, verses 3 and 4. A good friend has a sincere desire to meet the needs of the other person, and there's a willingness to put the other person's needs above their own. When was the last time you did something for your spouse that they wanted to do, but you didn't? And what was your attitude like as you were doing that? Are you a good friend? 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verses 4 through 7. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 3. A good friend patiently allows the other person to make mistakes without becoming angry or allowing those mistakes to damage the relationship. How do you respond when your spouse disappoints you? When was the last time your spouse disappointed you, and what did you do in response? What kinds of things does your spouse say after they make a mistake? Are they afraid to make a mistake? Are you a good friend? Romans 15, 6 and 7. A good friend allows the other person to be themselves in their presence without putting so much pressure on that other person that they feel condemnation and rejection. What does your spouse do that you wouldn't do? And what do you do when they do it? Philippians chapter 2, 1 and 2. Romans 12, 16 and 18. Romans 14, verse 19. A good friend does what they can legitimately do to avoid tension and conflict. What kind of things do you do to make difficult discussions easier? 1 Corinthians 1, 10 and 11. A good friend essentially possesses the same moral values, the same reverence for God, and the same basic desire to live for Christ. What is your dream as a couple to do for Jesus? Are you passionately pursuing Christ and seeking his glory? This is what good friends do. Are you good friends? Ephesians 4:25, Colossians 3:9. A good friend is honest, trustworthy, truthful, dependable. Is there anything you're lying to your spouse about? Matthew 5:21-26, James 5, verse 16. A good friend quickly seeks reconciliation when they've hurt the other person. And if they've sinned against the other person, they quickly ask for forgiveness for sin. What does it look like when you ask for forgiveness? What do you say? How does the other person respond? What do they say? Describe the last time you asked for forgiveness. Can you remember the last time you asked for forgiveness? A good friend is quick to ask for forgiveness. A good friend actively seeks to build the other person up spiritually. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 11. How do you help each other grow? Luke 17, verse 3. A good friend doesn't only ask for forgiveness when he's sinned. A good friend seeks to be reconciled to the other person when they've sinned. How do you respond when your spouse hurts you? Is it easy for you to forgive, or is it hard? Why do you say so? Proverbs 27, 5, 6, and 9. A good friend gently, kindly, and lovingly rebukes the other person when there's a pattern of sin in their life. Describe the last time you corrected your spouse. What was it about? What did you say? How did they react? What did you do well? What could you have done better? Are you a good friend? Galatians 5:13, John 13, 14, and 15. A good friend makes it a habit to meet as many of their friends' needs as they possibly can. What does your spouse enjoy as a treat? What makes them happy to receive? When was the last time you did something special for your spouse? What was it? Are you a good friend? A good friend provides comfort when the other person is feeling sorrow. 2 Corinthians 1, 3, and 4. 1 Thessalonians 4, 18. How does your spouse like to be comforted when they're sad? James 5:16. A good friend prays for the other person. Ephesians 6:18. When was the last time you got on your knees and prayed for your spouse? 1 Peter 4, 8, and 9. A good friend practices hospitality. He seeks to make the other person feel comfortable when they're in his presence. When you haven't seen your spouse all day, what do you do when you greet each other for the first time? Normally. Philippians 1, 5, Philippians 4, 3. A good friend joins with the other in mutual activities. What kind of things do you do together? John 15, 15. A good friend shares their heart with the other person on a deep level. When do you have significant times to talk? When was the last time you had a really good conversation? Philippians chapter 2, verse 4. A good friend patiently listens to the other person, is really interested in what they're interested in, and what they're concerned about, they're concerned about. Would your spouse say you're a good listener? Are you a good friend? Would your spouse say you enjoy hearing them talk? When we talk about friendship, we're not just talking about doing what we like and having people think we're cool. There's a lot more to a biblical friendship. And I'm asking, are you a good friend to your spouse? Because when we talk about friendship in marriage, we're not just talking about an ordinary kind of friendship. We're talking about best friends. We're talking about oneness. We're talking about unity. You remember how in Genesis it talks about one flesh. That's a picture of how deep this friendship should go. We're talking about a relationship in which the husband and wife share their life completely as long as they both shall live. As one man puts it, it's a type of relationship that is shared with no one else other than one's mate. It's a partnership in every area of life for as long as both partners live. There is absolutely nothing which one spouse can say to the other, this is none of your business. The wife has complete access to every area of her husband's life, and he has the same with hers, which is awesome, but it's not what many people are experiencing at all. Are you? Are you? Are you a good friend to your spouse? We're going to talk in our next video about what hinders friendship in marriage and what you can do about it. But before we talk about what hinders friendship in marriage, I want you to slow down and evaluate the state of your marriage. God wants you to enjoy marriage. His plan for marriage is beautiful, and it involves pursuing a deep friendship with your spouse. And if you're going to pursue a deep friendship with your spouse, you need not to not just wait till they're a good friend to you. You need to go back to God's Word, learn what it says about friendship, and make a commitment yourself to pursue a deep friendship with your spouse. Are you willing to do that? I pray that you are. It's worth it.